Welcome to the Sunday Times Politics Weekly, where, as always, we explore the big political stories of the moment. I'm Mike Siluma, and thanks for joining us. This week on the Politics Weekly, we focus on a hot potato that has just landed on South Africa's lap, the impending visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin to attend the Brics summit later on this year. Our country has been placed in a quandary after the International Criminal Court issued a warrant of arrest for Putin over alleged atrocities in the Ukraine war. The warrant compels South Africa as a signatory of the ICC's Rome Statute to arrest President Putin if he happened to land here or anywhere else where the country is a signatory to the statutes. To discuss this acute dilemma for our country, we're joined in this episode by Professor Sphamandla Zondi, who teaches politics and international relations at UJ at the University of Johannesburg, as well as Professor William Gumede, who's an associate professor at the School of Governance at Wits University.
You asked Mr. Ramaphosa to sit down first. I'm standing.
Now I warn you.
I need to put on my big girl panties and keep going.
You can't have two speakers standing at the same time.
Security services of the Republic of South Africa, you may intervene.
There's been several attempts on my life.
Lower that hand.
It's not allowed.
The president is accused of serious crimes.
Honorable,
You can't be addressed by a person like this. This is an order of the House.
In order to pursue the greater good, you have to enable some people to eat a little bit.
Corrupt people do not eat alone. They have a spider web.
I now suspend the proceedings. I have warned you.
Welcome to the both of you. Let us start with you, Professor Zondi. The ICC, most people would not engage in the life of a structure like the ICC as to why it's there and what is it exactly. Do you want to just give us a précis of what the ICC is?
Yes, good afternoon. The International Criminal Court is a special court created in order to deal with issues that the institutionalized court of the United Nations, called the Court of Justice, did not deal with. The Court of Justice is almost like a constitutional court, and that is meant to interpret the Charter of the United Nations, but not to really deal with violations of that charter. That may include what was already increasing in the 1980s and 1990s, violations that took the form of crimes against humanity and crimes against nations, genocides, and things of that nature. Because they had realized that there was that gap, there was that missing arm in the international justice system, for an institution that would do that. And because that gap also related to the fact that in many cases, national justice systems were inadequate or unable or disabled from dealing with these particular crimes that they would ordinarily deal with, because the politicians summarily weakened them, summarily turn them into toothless dogs and intimidate them and so on. And because also the regional courts that have been established across the world, the European Court of Human Rights, the African Court of Human and People's Rights, and many others, mostly because they too seemed unable to deal with these particular crimes. Then there was a need to create one that would be cross-continental, and but this would not be fully inserted into the UN Charter and become a charter organization, but it would still have sufficient power on the basis of the countries that ratify it. And then this court now is ratified. The treaty establishing this court has now been ratified by 123 countries, which means it still has to be ratified by 144 countries. But with these 123 countries, it has enough teeth to start to bite. And that is what the court was done. It's still a court in its infancy. It's still being built up. It's still building its integrity and building its public trust in it. And that's part of the biggest challenge they have now.
So it does not have its own, if you will, its own police arm or anything like that can hunt down people who are considered transgressors?
It was never meant to be, because no court actually has an enforcement and a police force. Even our national courts, they do not have a police force. It is the states in which a court is that would have that. And in this particular case, the ICC is not in the United Nations, so it could have perhaps used the United Nations itself as an institution that must create this enforcing a tool, and therefore must rely on enforcement by members and willing and able states across the world to enforce its decision. That is why it has only been able to really be very effective in cases where it has indicted a rebel group and a government that the rebel group is challenging, then effects the arrest on behalf of the ICC. Pretty much arrest your enemy that you are unable to defeat in war. Just arrest them and take them to the ICC.
Okay, Professor Gumede, I'd like for you to come in here. One of the, Professor Zondi has just mentioned that not all countries are signatories or members of the ICC, and one of the enduring criticisms of it is that not all countries are in, but also some of the loudest players on the globe are not members, but they are urging other people to be members and for other people to be arrested, like the United States, for example. Isn't that a fatal feature of the current arrangement as things stand?
No, thank you for having me on the program again. Just to say that, South Africa was one of the original signatories to the Rome Statute in 1998, which created the ICC. And we were in Africa, the first countries that actually incorporated the Rome Statute into our national law. So what does it mean really is that crimes designated by the ICC become crimes under South African law. So that really is important. Now, the weakness really of the ICC is that, it has 124 members, and out of Africa, African countries, 34 African countries are signatories. So Africa is the largest group. Now, the big players in the world, the US, Russia, China, and so on, are not signatories. Now, that really is a fatal flaw of the ICC, because if you can remember in the past, many African countries and developing countries have criticized the ICC for the fact that, the US and Russia and China are exempted, so their citizens and their politicians cannot be held accountable, but only African countries and developing countries are held accountable through the ICC. So that really is, it's a major flaw. And now, more directly now, with Russian President Putin coming to South Africa, the ICC has issued a warrant for his arrest. Now, the technical question here is, since Russia is not a signatory to the ICC, what does it mean from a legality point of view, and so on? And I think when the South African government said last week that it will seek legal advice to have a look at what do you do, although in the South African case, since we are a signatory and the original signatory to the ICC, and not only that we also turn the ICC statute, the ICC law also becomes our law. Really, from a legal point of view, I can see no option but for South African government to actually arrest Putin if he comes to South Africa, just if it's strictly according to law.
Professor Zondi, we will come to the nuts and bolts of the conundrum, for South Africa in relation to Putin. But I wanted to understand, what was the thinking behind South Africa deciding to join the ICC? Because it seems to have been the bane of our lives. You know, we've had, from the days of al-Bashir, and now we've got Putin, you know. So what was the rationale for us to join the ICC?
South Africa identified with a view, which actually, by the way, was pushed very strongly by developing countries, that the international justice system was inadequate to deal with these major crimes against humanity that were taking place in the world. And Africa pushed very strongly that we needed to have this mechanism created, machinery created, to deal with this. There was a lot of resistance from the West, by the way. Europe did not favor this idea completely. The US never favored it, and as a result, it stayed out of it completely. Big countries, the P5, did not favor it. No, so Russia, China, Africa, France, UK, US, they all opposed. It was actually the developing countries that felt you needed a multinational, international mechanism to deal with it, principally because, like South Africa, these developing countries believe very strongly that a multilateral system is what you need to deal with all issues, be it climate change, be it energy, be it conflict, now also be it these crimes against humanity. And they believe very strongly the principle of multilateralism, and the ICC was an extension of it. And that is why South Africa was very enthusiastic about it, and a number of African countries were also very enthusiastic about it. It is countries in Africa that already had issues of concern that would not have done that. So that is what explains South Africa not just ratifying it very quickly and become one of the founding members and really champion the fact that it's one of the founding members, but then domesticize it by turning it, as Professor Gumede indicated, into national law.
But some people have pointed out, as you know, Professor Zondi, that the intention may have been noble, but the practice actually is turning out to be different to what may have been envisaged. You know, for example, there's the abiding argument that, for example, the invasion of Iraq should have been classified as a crime. You know, the invasion of Libya should have been classified as a crime. And yet the people who perpetrated that have walked away scot-free from the wreckage. Is that a valid criticism?
Let me just say this very quickly. A lot of African countries, because they were enthusiastic about this, they also brought the issues before the ICC that related to intra-African conflict, especially in the Great Lakes. Then brought forward the junta leaders, rebel leaders, heads of armed militia, and all of that. And that had the implication of populating the cases before the ICC with African cases. Because we're enthusiastic about the court, we brought the cases to us. Now, those who were not enthusiastic about the ICC could not be expected to enthusiastically bring the cases outside of Africa to the ICC. And there is the catch. The countries have always been reluctant, did not bring their people in, did not bring issues from their origin in, and all of that, because they were not enthusiastic about it. So in the real part of the reason why it's dominated by the African cases is because the Africans were enthusiastic about it. And of course, they developed the question about, but why is it not also doing Iraq? Why is it not also doing other things? Who has brought Iraq to the ICC? We have not brought it. Others have not brought it. And those who are implicated in it have also promised that if you bring any of the United States, for example, that if you bring any of its people, soldiers or officials before the ICC, it has already said that the ICC headquarters will be a legitimate military target. It's like, they touch our people, we will show you flames. So that is the reason why then you would have a situation where so many of those cases, Libya and all that, would not serve before the ICC, because they say we're not party to the ICC, therefore you would not touch us. This is what Russia is now using and saying we're also not part of the ICC. Anyone who arrests Putin, there might be a legitimate military targets for us. And that creates a huge dilemma. Imagine if Sudan has to arrest Putin and then has to become a military target. How can it defend itself?
Yeah.
It's a serious thing. And that is partly because the International Criminal Court issues are not purely legal issues. They are geopolitical issues. So it won't be decided on the basis what is legally right or not right. It's also going to be decided on the basis of how to manage the power balance and also how to do diplomacy around it in order to enable the court to serve its purpose. Sometimes the judges of the ICC forget that they are not pure judges. They are judges over a geopolitical court. So some decisions are correct, like it could be correct right now to indict George Bush, but it would be unwise for it. Not only that it might be bombed, but the US might kill it fully. So there are certain decisions that, unfortunately, in a situation where we have the power of the might, there are limitations about what we could do using the prescripts of law and moral judgment.
Professor Gumede, it would seem to me that the whole issue about whether South Africa should or should not arrest Putin as a result of the IEC decision is becoming a proxy basically for a tussle that's happening with our international relations as to where we should be standing in relation to the Ukraine war. You know, should we remain neutral or should we condemn Russia, etc.? What's your view of that? Where should South Africa be standing in that conflict?
I mean, you know, this issue is far bigger than South Africa, and it's not just a South African issue. This is now a global issue. I mean, here is where now the ICC, this is a test for the ICC, the legitimacy and the credibility and authority of the ICC. So it's far beyond South Africa. Now, I mean, as Professor Zondi said earlier on, developing countries and particularly African countries, now the largest bloc of members of the ICC, were very enthusiastic about the ICC because the ICC offers, above national courts, offers potentially a neutral international court to deal with some of the issues. I mean, if you think about it, since when it was started in 1998 up to 2017, 9 out of the 10 cases of the ICC was African. And the interesting thing about it was that Africans actually took the cases there. So whether it's government, whether it's opposition parties or civil society organizations. So it was not Western countries that took African cases to the ICC. It was Africans who took the cases to the ICC. Now, I think that whether the ICC will survive the Putin matter, it's going to be very critical now, because a couple of years ago, some members of the African Union, African countries wanted to leave, and I remember in the first session as chair of the African Union at the time, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, for example, had proposed that African countries withdraw from the AU and instead form their own African court. And in 2017, African countries adopted at the AU a non-binding resolutions calling for African countries to leave the ICC. Now, not many left. There's only Burundi and the Gambia, although the Gambia then later reversed its decision and stayed there. Now, nevertheless, because, for Africans, the ICC, not only for Africans, but also for other developing countries, still remain, a credible court above their own national courts to deal with African and developing countries disputes, which often are bigger than the countries or bigger than the national judicial system of countries. So that maybe is the first thing that one has to recognize. Now, secondly, the thing is, the question has been unresolved how to bring in the non-signatories into the jurisdiction of the court. And that's actually, and this for the first time, we now have Putin as the leader of a country who's not a signatory is now, is in the dock, so to speak. So I think it will be the moment for almost the life the authority and the credibility of the ICC is going to be tested through this, because if Putin is taken, then it means, individuals from the non-signatories, like, US individuals will also have to be taken. If somebody obviously lay a complaint against them.
But where should South Africa be standing in respect of the war itself, the war in Ukraine, do you think?
Obviously, because of our past, what we need to do, and what our constitution is very clear, that we have to stand for human rights. That's what our constitution is all about. So we have to condemn Russia, for human rights abuses. We cannot run away from it, because that will be unconstitutional. And secondly, also, there's a bigger political context. If we allow Russia to get away in invading Ukraine, that whole issue, the post-colonial African idea of sovereignty for African countries will be gone, because after Russia, say any other country invades an African country, then we will never be able to say, let's defend that African country politically, because, the whole idea of sovereignty in international law is being contested here by Russia invading Ukraine, another country. And, that is really been in a post-colonial Africa. For African countries, the idea of sovereignty, of being independent, has had a really strong, it's been a really strong principle. And by South Africa and other African countries supporting Russia in the Ukraine war, we undermine that fundamental principle, post-colonial African principle of independence.
Hey, Professor Zondi, where do you think we should be standing in this conflict?
I think we should, as it is the case, oppose invasion. There should never be justification for invasions, for breaching the territorial integrity of other countries, because we would not appreciate anyone breaching our own territorial integrity. We should, secondly, related to that, we should oppose military means of governance, of diplomacy, of international relations in this day and age. It was okay in the 15th century, maybe, but in this day and age, military means never solve any problem. Therefore, Russia is wrong to use military means to solve the problem that it had. And I also think similarly, militarizing Ukraine is wrong because it doesn't solve the problem. What is a serious indictment on the world today is that there has been an abandonment of diplomacy as the only durable solutions to the major conflicts and tensions in the past 100 years. We've managed very difficult situations in the past, and that was through diplomacy. And then suddenly, right now, we've abandoned that, and there is now a huge focus backed by Russia by going militarily into Ukraine. Now the rest of those that I thought were morally correct to oppose Russia then act like Russia. Militarize Ukraine, sacrifice Ukrainian children and men and women in the name of some geopolitical victory that is being required. So for that reason, it's very important to oppose the invasion, but also to oppose responses to the invasion that are militaristic. And that leaves you with a position called non-aligned position. And if you look at how African countries have voted in the United Nations, they have said we oppose the invasion, but we also oppose the responses to the invasion because they will not help bring about peace. And then they abstain. Because if you are forced, if you go with the condemnation of Russia, it comes with all other things. It doesn't, when we vote for yes, we are not just saying yes, we condemn. We are saying yes, we condemn, therefore in sanctions, therefore the arming of Ukraine is correct. Many African countries would never find it correct. That some of those countries have government that have armed themselves and brutalized people, they were wrong. But it can't be correct that you have a military solution to what was a wrong military move by Russia.
Hey, Professor Gumede, part of this pressure, to take sides for African countries, including South Africa, to take a stand, either for Ukraine or for Russia, or to condemn Russia, for example. Part of that conversation has been that, okay, South Africa is going to regret not siding with NATO or with the US or with Ukraine, that there are going to be consequences economically. Is this an empty threat, or is it something we should be taking more seriously?
I mean, I don't think there is a either or, and I think those who make the arguments, I think they're just being silly. If you look at Brazil's response, and Brazil is a fellow member of Brics just like us. Now, Brazil criticized Russia for the invasion, but it did not mean that it supported all of the other things. That the Western, NATO, the Western countries wanted them to do. So, and it is very important. So from a country, we should have had a much more nuanced approach by saying, we criticize what Russia is doing and the invasion and so on, and we support the human rights of all the Ukrainian people, and that doesn't mean we now automatically are now pro-US or pro-NATO. In fact, that shows us actually as very independent, standing firm, standing for democracy, standing for human rights, and so on. Now, in terms of the consequences for having a neutrality position, which is actually in favor of Russia. There are consequences of really that we have to deal with. I think the first thing is, our bigger trading partners are still, the US and the European Union, industrial countries combined. Those are our biggest trading partners. And not only our biggest trading partners, but our biggest developmental aid are still coming from the industrial world, from, the NATO members. I'll just give you an example. I mean, let's just take, a social development space, the civil space. Now, in the social development, it's a very broad space, civil space. We've got, it's about 800 to 1 million employees in that space. Now we get most of the jobs are actually created by overseas development aid, which is coming from the US in Europe. So, for example, if the US and Europe just take out that development aid, we will have 800 jobs gone. So this is we're not even talking here about trade issues. We're just talking about removing developmental aid. And I can tell you, even in Africa, a third of African countries' budgets are supported by development aid from industrial countries. Like a country like Rwanda has been one of the biggest growth spurs the last decade. If one removes the development aid from Rwanda's budget every year, it will be negative. They will actually have negative growth. So it is very, very substantial. So the way we position, if we're not strategic enough, it will have consequences for us here at home, from investment point of view, from a jobs point of view, and so on.
Hey, Professor Zondi, lastly, I wanted to ask, hypothetically, if you were President Ramaphosa, you have just extended an invitation to President Putin to visit your country, to attend the conference, the Brics summit, and then the ICC decides that actually he's a war criminal who you need to arrest if he ever should come to your country. What would you do? Do you withdraw the invitation? Do you wait to arrest the guy? What would you do?
From where I stand, you would do what we've always done in the past when we're faced with an al-Bashir, Lubenga, and a few other people issues. You politely ask them not to physically come because you will have the obligation to arrest them in terms of law and all that. So you ask them to politely ask them not to come. And secondly, you or you convert the summit to a virtual summit and all that. And then I've heard now that the summit could actually be moved to one of the bigger Brics countries, like India, like China, or even Russia itself. So they have a number of options to do, but it looks like the simplest one is to convert the summit into a virtual summit, as it has been, by the way, virtual for the past 3 years, and move on that basis. It seems to be that pretty the most reasonable one. The choice chosen on al-Bashir, which was to say we'll proceed with the invitation, and then we will ignore the obligation to arrest. It's simply too risky. The experience that Bashir tells us, which is one of the scariest things, that they can still ignore if they wish to. Bashir, Putin could come, and there could even be a court case and all that, and they can still ignore it. Because as we know from the last experiences, there was no consequence. No one was arrested for contempt of court. No one, because we couldn't figure out who is supposed to be arrested. Yeah, I know it's one of those difficult things that had to relate to how you strengthen the court. What happens when a government is in contempt of court? But we then heard after that the government had been in contempt of court in over 40 cases, some of them dealing with court judgment on service delivery. So the idea of government being in contempt of court had the pattern already and all that. But that is like a hard-nosed response to say, to hell. We're going to do that. They've done it in the past. But I wouldn't advise on that. I'd better you convert this summit into a virtual summit.
And Professor Gumede, if you were sitting in Matlambandlovu and you were confronted with this dilemma, what would you do? Would you politely tell Putin not to come? And if he says, "What kind of friend are you?" what would you say?
No, absolutely. I actually agree with Professor Zondi. I mean, if I was the government, I would actually ask President Putin not to come. Or alternatively, I think most probably the best scenario is to have a virtual conference. Because that's, previous conferences, particularly during COVID, BRICS conferences were virtual. It's, I think, strategically to move the BRICS conference from South Africa to another country really, I think, will most probably hit South Africa politically. It will hit the country's stature politically, its diplomatic authority, and it would seem it actually will also be almost as bad, certainly, as having Putin here, because we're bringing the country a different dilemma, the dilemma of, the country had now buckled under pressure from industrial countries, which will cause another debate in the country and a debate in the ANC. So to escape all of these, debates is rather to ask Putin not to come, or to have, I think the best scenario is to have a virtual conference, because as I say again, this issue is not just about South Africa and South Africa's constitution. This has actually now become a bigger issue for the ICC, the issue of can one hold leaders from countries who are not members of the ICC accountable. So it's a much bigger issue than the South African situation, and that is why I think either virtual conference will mostly be the best way out for South Africa.
Okay. Well, that's where we'll wrap it up on the Sunday Times Politics Weekly this time round. And I'd like to thank our guests, Professor Sphamandla Zondi, who teaches politics and international relations at the University of Johannesburg, as well as Professor William Gumede, who's Associate Professor at the School of Governance at Wits University. We appreciate your time. I'm Mike Siluma. Until next time, do stay safe, stay blessed, and let's do good for our country.
Sunday Times Politics Weekly is a production of Arena Holdings. Thanks to our producer, Bulelani Nonyukela. If you liked our show, please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite streaming app and share our podcast with your friends. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe for free on Iono FM, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Player FM, or wherever you get your podcasts.